Okay, I'm going to get started. Uh, I hope everybody had a good break. Did you all have good breaks? Yes? How many of you were looking forward to coming back from break and starting classes again? How many of you wish break would have lasted longer? Okay, cool. All right, good. So I'm going to do something a little different this week, and I'm going to start out by telling you a little bit about why I'm doing it differently. And bear with me just for a few minutes. I will get to markets, which is what I'm supposed to talk about this week. But even that, I think I'm going to talk about in a different way than usual. I usually tell students in my smaller classes when I'm kind of introducing the course material, we're going over the syllabus and all that shit, and I tell them, well, it's really important to me that whatever you do in this class, that you be real with me, and that I'll be real with you. And I realized over the course of the I realized during break that over the course of the first half of the semester, I think there's some ways in which I haven't really been real with you, and so then it feels kind of unfair for me to ask you to be real with me. So here's what's going on. Besides, this is a humanities class, and we're human beings, so I think it's important to act like that. So this is, I don't know if I said this already, I've said it in a different class. This is my last semester at Michigan. I started teaching here in 1992, so that's 25 years. Which is, I think, probably longer than any of you have been alive. And the situation is this. Over here, let's see if I get this laser right. Over here is where I live all the time. That's Oberlin, Ohio. My wife teaches at Oberlin College. So for the last 5.5 years, we've been living in Oberlin, and then on the days that I teach, I do this up to here, where Michigan is. Then I teach and do my work, and then I get back in the car, and I do that. So you can see, it says 2 hours, 8 minutes, but that's kind of a lie. It's more like 2:30. So we've been doing that, I've been doing that for like 5.5 years, and it's exhausting and kind of feels like it's killing me. So fortunately, I was invited to apply to and then accept a position at Oberlin College for next fall. So I get to do that starting next fall, but what that means also is that this is it for me. And that opportunity to not be on that anymore, which looks so nice when you look at it like that, but it's not, actually. It's horrible. It's really horrible. There't so much less on the Ohio Turnpike than that picture makes it look like. What I want to say, first of all, I guess, is that the decision to do that is partly made within a market. I don't want to force this, but we tend not to think about higher education as existing within a market, but it does. My teaching you is worth something. My presence on a faculty is worth something. Not enough, probably, and I don't just mean not enough in terms of what I get paid. I get paid enough. But not enough necessarily to be able to command the working conditions that I'd like. Like, for example, having a job in the same town as the person I've chosen to spend my life with, right? So, I know this happens in lots of other professions. Markets require families to separate. And so the decision to leave Michigan is a really important one for me personally. And it's also good in all kinds of professional ways for me. But I want to stress that it wasn't an entirely free choice. It was a choice that was compelled by the conditions of the market in higher education. So that's what it looks like when I get home. So what this did for me this semester was really stir up a lot of feelings. I've been here 25 years, like I say, and I've worked really hard here, and I've changed a lot in the course of those 25 years. I was doing something entirely different when I started at Michigan, and part of that process of kind of discovering myself as I grew up, basically, here as a professor, got me to a point where I finally felt like I was really making a mark on this institution in ways that were really meaningful to me. Not just in the classroom on my students, but in the sort of overall climate and culture on campus. And I think that I approached this semester knowing that it was my last, wanting to really finish strong, to kind of end on a high note and to do something unforgettable in that last semester. So for the first 6 weeks of this class, I don't know if you even noticed this, honestly. I have no idea what it's like from your side of the room. But what I've been trying to do is put on a show. I spend 20 to 25 hours a week writing out the lectures that I share with you on Mondays, that I read to you, and putting together the PowerPoints to try and provide you with a kind of quasi-documentary experience. And I think the idea was, consciously, like I said, that it would be something unforgettable for you, and then I could finish my time at Michigan with a sense of closure and satisfaction, and then move on. But you know, it's not really been that way. I don't think it really works that way. Leaving Michigan is a little bit like something, it's not like retiring, it's more like somebody dying. And you know, the semester will end, but that's an arbitrary end point. It doesn't mean that, you know, just like when someone passes, you don't necessarily have all the things set in order that you need emotionally when that happens. It just happens. You can try and make peace with the person, you can try and get closure, you can try and finish strong, but it will end when it ends. And you know, the last day of classes might be a really shitty day for me. And that could be bad. I mean, it could just be an off day for me or for my students, and that would be too bad as a way to close up. And I've been trying to kind of defend myself against that by prepping these lectures. But this is how it feels to me when I'm in lecture. You're out here, I know you're here, I see you. But it feels like that, like there isn't anybody here in the room. And I imagine that this is what it feels like to be you in these lectures. It might be wrong, I don't know, I mean, I hope it's wrong, but it's what I'm afraid of. So, consequently, I do this. That's me this weekend in my armor, putting together a lecture for you, a show, so that I don't have to deal with the messiness of this whole process of leaving Michigan. But I'm tired of doing that. I'm worn out. I don't think I'm doing a good job. I don't think I'm doing anything unforgettable. But most importantly, I don't think I'm being real with you, and that's important to me. I don't really know how to do this a different way than how I've been doing it, so this may suck worse. I don't know. That's kind of part of the risk that I'm having to take, but I hope it doesn't. I just don't know. I'm going to do the best that I can. You know, I've talked to you already about how much I hate lecturing. You know, those slides indicate a little bit of how it feels to me to be lecturing. You know that lectures are bad for you pedagogically. They're not just boring, they're ineffective. The reason we have lectures, I don't know if I explained this to you already, is because it is economically efficient from the point of view of the university's administration to have more of your bodies, and above each of your heads there's a dollar sign. That's what you pay, right? Above my head there's a dollar sign too. It's what I cost the university. So the more dollar signs there are in the room for each dollar sign at the front of the room, the better for the University of Michigan economically. All right? So That might be fine. For certain disciplines, it might be a great way to deliver information to large groups of people. I don't know. I don't work in those disciplines. I work in a discipline in the humanities where the very essence of what I do involves conversation. Reading as a conversation with people that have written things in the past, but especially conversations with students. And evidently enough, at least for 1 hour a week, we aren't having a conversation. You aren't talking. You know, I sort of try to make you do shit in lecture to activate you a little bit, but it's kind of not, you know, really optimal. What would be optimal would be for this not to exist, actually. For us to be in small groups of maybe 15 at the most, where we could all talk and get to know each other. But that, within the market of higher education today, is inefficient. And so we're here instead. So I'm going to try and make the best of it. This is going to zoom in too slowly, but that's okay. All right. One of the things that happens when I do it this way is I have no idea if I'm going to finish like in 10 minutes. I also can't see the clock because that light is blinding me. I don't know if I'm going to finish in like 10 minutes or if I'm going to get maybe a tenth of the way through what I hope to say to you and it'll be noon. So that's another thing you're going to have to kind of bear with and that I have to confront as I try and figure out what I'm doing. So quickly though, I just, you know, to kind of stabilize myself so I'm not just throwing off the armor and like the Under Armour all at once, I'm just going to quickly remind you of where we've been. I mean, I still think these are cool, these slides I make. Okay, you know the sports machine. This basically is what we did the first 4 weeks. We talked about bodies. Desires have to do with the desire to play. Effort has to do with the need to overcome limits. Oh shit, it stopped. Let's see if I can get it back. All right, it's going to go away quickly, I guess. Okay, values, the intangible ideals we bring to it, and then that gets funneled into this machine. Social parts, organizations, corporations, and the media transform that into products, all right? Which is what we'll get to a little bit later in the semester. Today we're focusing on corporations or the market, all right? So that's where we've been, just to kind of remind you. I want you to just think about raw materials and about that machine really as a kind of industrial device today, all right? So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what markets are. I think of them, there's a lot of different definitions. Obviously, a market originally was just a place, a physical locale where people would come to exchange things that they needed that they had for things that they needed. Now, you know, in this kind of globalized economy, it might be more helpful, and especially in the context of sports, not to think of it as a physical locale, but as a set of processes. All right, but the basic thing is still there. We exchange things we need or want with others for things that they have, okay? The things that we exchange in those processes are called commodities, okay? Commodities, which can be, you know, these are the familiar ones that we usually talk about in economics. Today I want to stretch it a little bit so that you can think about what I'm doing, the information, knowledge as a commodity, okay? The ability to impart knowledge as a commodity that you are paying for, or someone's paying for. Sports as a commodity. Sports performance as a commodity. We're going to get into the details of what this looks like. But I just want to give you a sense, this is a key term, commodities. As is the fact that commodities have two aspects. This is a really important part of commodities for understanding how they work within a market, all right? The first aspect of a commodity is called its use value. That is just what it is used for. All right? So knowledge might be used for personal growth. Okay? An onion might be used for satisfying hunger. All right? That is what it's worth, what it's for to the person who is using it. Once we enter a market, though, part of what happens is that commodities acquire a second dimension, which is their exchange value. That is what they can be exchanged for in the market. My knowledge goes to you in exchange for X thousands of dollars that you pay for the credits that this class represents. Okay? That onion might be, I don't know, 69 cents or something like that. All right. I'm going to look at this exchange value, use value issue a little more closely with a sports example now. All right. So here's a pair of sneakers. These very ones. Well, not the, I mean, those aren't my shoes. But those are a new pair. Use value of a pair of sneakers. They protect your feet. We can also acknowledge that they allow you a certain way to express yourself, right? That's useful too. So use value doesn't just have to be physical needs or wants that you have. They can also be emotional or psychological needs or wants that you have, right? The exchange value, though, is what it's worth when you exchange those sneakers. So I own a pair of Nike Jordan 1s, and I want to sell them, right? Exchange them for something else. I could exchange them for $139.99, okay? Or 64 dozen eggs. There's a whole bunch of other things you could put in there instead of eggs. A certain number of gallons of gas, probably be like a quarter of a pair of Yeezys. You know, all of these, you can always do these kinds of exchanges. Once you're in a market and you establish the exchange value of the object, of the commodity, right? Okay, so let's look at it this way now. Exchange value tells us this. A pair of shoes, a pair of Jordans, is worth 64 dozen eggs. How is that possible? How are they, what makes them equal? They're dissimilar products. They satisfy totally different use values for people. So what's the basis? They must have something in common for them to be exchangeable. Okay? So what is that something? Human labor time. Okay? It is what goes in to every commodity, whether it is going to be used just by the person who makes, you know, who raises the chickens and has the eggs just for their own family's use, like in subsistence, or whether they're going to take those eggs to market. Human labor goes into the production of an egg, and it goes into the production of a pair of Nike sneakers. All right? Try for the moment, just, you may be thinking about machines, you know, the Nike production process, which is an enormously complex economic and industrial enterprise, but those machines also involve human labor, if only ultimately the human labor involved in mining the metals that wind up getting put into machines. Even if machines are made by machines, somewhere down the line, things you got to recognize don't just spring into being on this earth. They're made by the labor of human beings. Human labor time is what is in that equal sign that makes it possible for value to pass back and forth between those two commodities and any others we might think of. All right. Let's see. So what I want you to realize, too, is that time is life. Okay? Your labor is your life. So just let me go back for a second. When I say human labor time, we often think, and certainly economists tend to think about labor as just a factor of production. It's a quantity, an abstract quantity. Okay? We're not thinking about actual people, right? But I want you to be thinking about actual people. So this time is the time of your life. Okay? So when you exchange, whatever you exchange, for whatever commodity you want, what you are exchanging is part of your life? Hours, a certain number of hours of your life that you can't get back, just to be clear, because it's finite, as you know, just to be kind of obvious about it. So just think about this in terms of sports. Now I'll go back to LeBron. All right, so here's LeBron. He's working out, right? Like a lot of athletes do. Any elite athlete spends countless hours, besides the hours we see them on the court or the field or the pool or the stadium, countless hours over the course of a lifetime, right, to create the potential for athletic performance that they want then to sell to these guys, owners. So this is Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. The owners, in turn, have invested capital to acquire the legal right to an athlete's performance and also the means, like arenas and so forth, by which they can exhibit those performances, right? What they want to do with those performances or competitions is sell them, right? Remember, these are all commodities. We're in a market exchange. Everything's a commodity. Everything is being exchanged on the basis of labor time that's at the bottom of it. They want to sell it to fans who are going to spend money that they earned by selling their own labor time, right? So when I go to a Cavs game at the Q, because remember I live in Oberlin, so I'm a half hour from the Q. When I go to a Cavs game at the Q and I get my tickets online in a market for tickets, maybe I spend, I don't know, $150. That's a certain amount of my life that I have exchanged for the right to sit in a certain place in that arena that is owned by Dan Gilbert, who is the owner of the Cavs, who has also acquired the right to exhibit LeBron James's basketball performances. So I've spent a certain amount of my time, of my life, to sit there and get to watch LeBron James play basketball, okay? And that's via this whole kind of process. All right, so how do we think about this in a humanities class? That's the next thing I want to talk about. I'm not an economist. That's obvious probably to anybody in here who's even taken one economics class that has looked at markets, and you're thinking, damn, Iago, you don't know what you're talking about. You haven't thought about this and this and this and this, which are part of markets and of the economy. But I don't really care about that. I know enough to think about this from a humanistic point of view. And one of the things I know is that when we think about markets and being human, we're thinking about human beings, okay? So there's a whole bunch of questions and ways of thinking about economics and the market in sports that are interesting and no doubt important if your goal is to make money or to understand the economy in a narrow kind of quantitative way. But if your goal is to understand human experience, which is my goal as a humanities professor, then you have to think about this a little bit differently. And that's why I keep hammering this point about lives, human time, okay? I'm going to give you a sense of how to think about that with this term. So you saw already the word commodity. Commodification is the word we use to refer to the process by which objects, like onions or sneakers, not just objects though, the time and effort of human beings like me and you and LeBron James, and the relations between human beings, like the one between you and me, or the one between me and LeBron, become commodities, things that get bought and sold. And the relationships become commercial relationships, okay? So just think about the difference. Like, you go to a store, just to keep it simple. I mean, now you don't even go to a store, you just go online, right? So you go online, you want to buy something, that's a commercial relationship. Does anything else matter there besides whether they have the thing, how much the thing costs, and whether you have the money and will give it up? No. You don't care about the person who's selling it, and they don't care about you, right? So that's commodification. just like in this class, for the first 6 weeks at least, I've been acting like this is a commercial relationship. I mean, I haven't meant to, but basically I have. I've been talking at you like you are empty seats. And maybe you've been in or out, engaged or not, right? But certainly involved in a commercial transaction of your own, in which I'm commodified as an instructor. So part of what's going on this week is trying to get free of that, free of commodification. But the first step in getting free of it is noticing it, all right? So what we can do in humanities classes, right, given this fact, and that in a market, that is what we are doing, to one degree or another, we can ask, what's it feel like to be commodified? So it's important when you think about this to recognize one thing that you probably all believe, and to some degree it's true, but probably not to the extent you think, and that is that you are free. Okay? You probably all believe that you enter into these market transactions as a free, rational individual. Nobody made me buy this jersey. Nobody made you sit in this room, take this class, enroll in the University of Michigan. Nobody made me do that commute. I could have just quit. I could have just stayed in Oberlin all the time, or I could have done it totally differently, right? What do we have to complain about? We are free. No. I mean, yes, within a certain degree, but if it's a restricted kind of freedom, necessarily, and I think everybody can agree it's restricted in certain ways, then it's not freedom, right? Or at least there is a zone of unfreedom involved, okay? So keeping that in mind is really important, as is keeping in mind the importance of power differentials that can exist whenever we have a sort of market relationship, and how those power differentials, differences of power between two parties entering into an exchange, can be supported by other kinds of institutions, like government laws, for example, that protect private property, for example, right? So there are laws that say, that govern the contracts, for example, that I sign with an institution, that govern the contracts that you sign if you're student athletes, or that you're involved in when you pay tuition, and that govern the relationships between, say, someone like LeBron James, no matter how powerful he seems, and Dan Gilbert, the owner of the team that he is selling his services to. Okay? So keep in mind that that freedom that we imagine and that the market sort of promises us, right, is a very restricted and in some cases not freedom at all when you think about what commodification feels like. All right, so let's see. Oh yeah, okay. It's so different not to be reading these. Okay, this is just interesting, I think. This is you can see the growth in value. Forbes magazine annually gives the franchise value of the top 50 professional sports franchises in the world, okay? So what I did was just take the average of those top 50 between 2010 and 2016. These figures here are in billions of dollars, right? So this does not mean that the average professional sports franchise globally is worth $2 billion now. It means that the average of the top 50 is $2 billion, okay? But that's a whole lot of money. I want to point that out because I think sometimes, at least fans that I encounter frequently think, when they think about markets in sports, they think about the exorbitant salaries that professional athletes command in their sports, right? LeBron James just signed a 3-year, $99 million contract with the Cavs. That's fantastic, right? It is a tiny, tiny fraction of the value of the Cavs franchise, and a small fraction, not a tiny fraction, a small fraction of the value, of the portion of the value of the Cavs franchise that he is individually responsible for. Okay? So just keep in mind these numbers when you watch this next slide. This next slide is going to be a short movie, it's a clip, of a professional basketball player a few years ago, just after he discovered that he had been traded. Okay? At least I think that's what it's going to be. Oh, wait.
I was just getting to my room, got a call from my agent, said that the deal was done. It was very shocking to me. So, once I found it was done, I, kind of broke down in tears. It's just a love, it's a genuine love for each other. I don't consider these guys as teammates. I consider these guys as brothers. I don't consider the coaches as coaches. I consider them as fathers.
Okay, so that was Kendrick Perkins. Some of you might know the name. Traded from the Celtics to the Thunder that year. And, you see a grown man, a big guy, who kind of exudes power in all kinds of other ways, completely broken down by the fact that he's been traded, right? It's not that he's going to a bad team or anything like that. He was going to a good team. It's that it was breaking apart his social world, his relationships with his teammates and with his coaches, okay? So I wanted to begin with that because when we think about what does commodification feel like, you can think about it from the point of view of athletes, all right? The contracts they sign, in many cases, are very lucrative. The average NBA contract this year is, I think, around $6 million, okay? So that's a lot of money. It's more money than I will have made in my entire career as a professor combined, by a lot. However, these contracts are also restrictive. There's a whole bunch of things they can't do, okay? Some of you might know LeBron James was a great football player. He was recruited to play football for college. He cannot go play in the NFL, all right? There's restrictions on even what they can do with their free time in other ways. Some of those restrictions are legal restrictions written into contracts. Some of them are informal restrictions in the sense that they will pay a price. Obviously, athletes are tradable, so just think about what that means. To be tradable as a human being. That's commodification. That's what commodification feels like. Right? So try to resist if you are finding yourself with the feeling like, sure, they're tradable, but think of the money they're making. Just hold off, because then you're just thinking like an economist or a businessman. Don't just think about the money they're making. Think about being a human being and what it would be like for me, for example, to say to some other professor, you know what, I'll give you the 4 in the front row here and 3 in the back for 2 of because it's my decision to make, it's my class. I'll take those other 2, and then you just got to switch up now. Switch up. Actually, I'm going to split you 4 because you seem like you're friends. So I'm going to move the 2 of you to one class and the 2 of you to another class. Everybody cool with that? Or you know what? I'll trade you all to Ohio State for one of their complex class student enrollments. That could work for me. So just think about what it is to be tradable like an object, okay? To be a human being who is tradable. And then you can see on the slide on the right just the way in which value gets kind of measured in ever more detailed, granular, quantitative form that we will look at in a few weeks when we talk about numbers. But this is a slide from 538 that does a series of projections on every NBA player. And they may do it in other sports now too. And it tells you that Kendrick's 5-year market value is negative $0.6.8 million. So according to 538, whatever he's getting is more, obviously, than what he's worth. And that's based on all these statistics. Okay? So this is what commodification feels like if you look at the lower left part of the slide. Obviously, athletes are vulnerable to injury. They could be making all the money in the world. In the best of cases, their career will be done by the time they're 40, but in many cases, it will be done far sooner, and it could be done tomorrow for anybody, right? And don't forget, these are people who have invested an enormous amount of labor time to sell this, to develop themselves as a commodity, as an athletic commodity. So if they go down, what's next? They're vulnerable to social isolation because of the nature of their contracts. Obviously, we dehumanize and objectify athletes over here. But also, a more disturbing thing that we all do too, including me, is internalize the market logic of commodification, whereby you begin to think of yourself as a commodity, right? And when you start to have uncommodity-like experiences, such as a feeling or an emotion, you might tell yourself, no, 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 you can't have that, okay? Because it's getting in the way of what your goals might be, whatever they might be. So you internalize that market logic. Commodification also shapes the events, right? Where we have athletic competitions or performances that become spectacles, right? So think about the fact that we don't think of teams as teams so much as we do as franchises. That's an economic term, okay? It wasn't always that way in sports. You know, this is where Perkins is playing now. It's the Smoothie King Center in New Orleans. When I was a kid, I used to go see the Milwaukee Bucks play in Milwaukee at a place called Mecca. So just think about how different it is for an arena to be called Mecca versus Smoothie King Center. But, you know, the transition to, you know, franchises, or rather arenas getting branded, sort of makes sense, especially, you know, you think about Mecca. That's a site of religious pilgrimage, right? So is this. So is Smoothie King. It tells us something about what we worship. Uniforms, NBA is busting out advertisements on the uniforms next year, like there already are in many other leagues. So it might be a little bank logo or something like that. And then, as you know, you would know this, and depending on where you're from, you may have already been impacted by this directly. Franchises continually get money from local governments for various purposes, for renovations or for new arenas. And they get that, they can extract that money, whether or not it's good for the municipality, because they can threaten to leave, as franchises do, like Seattle moving to Oklahoma City in the NBA. The NFL has seen numerous franchises move. The competition itself changes. Think about watching a game, and whether or not it's a good moment competitively for this to happen, the game is interrupted because it's time for a television break, right? So some of you might have experienced this from the point of view of being an athlete and realizing the timeout is stretching on and on and on because TV has to run through its commercials. You might be ready to get back on the floor. It doesn't matter because they need to be selling. And then, of course, there are rules changes all the time in sports that are designed to make the sports more attractive as commodities. One of the most important cases of this in the last few years has been changes in the rules of cricket and the creation of an entirely new form of cricket. Cricket's a sport that traditionally, in its test match form, takes like 5 days to play out, right? But they've started a new league with different rules that makes it a faster game and therefore potentially more exciting to fans. That might be fine, but we should think about what gets lost in the process of trying to make commodities ever more attractive when it comes to sports. All right, and then for fans, You know, one of the big things for fans, I don't know how many of you regularly go to pro sports events, but they get more and more and more expensive, right? And for working class fans, they're utterly priced out of the market. You can go to the queue and, you know, I don't know, if you've got maybe 30 bucks, you can sit in like section 216, and I should have put up a picture of what that looks like. Like you're looking at ants, right? You're much better off watching it on TV. You want to get courtside? Forget it. Unless you are, you know, maybe a CEO of a local corporation or something like that, or you know somebody. Because of the commodified nature of the teams and the players themselves, the connection between the team and players gets broken. That's a social relationship that becomes a commercial relationship. That's what commodification feels like. It feels like your team leaving. The team that you were following ever since your grandpa first took you to a game, whenever that was. But they're gone now, and with that is that memory. It begins to fade. Players that you might have idolized are gone, and they reappear in someone else's uniform. We purchase these things, these objects, right, as a way of trying to get a relationship instead of the human relationship, right? This is a commercial relationship I have with LeBron James. It's the best I get. And then I think, you know, this is part of the process is that we become passive as fans. We are encouraged to consume sports, but not to produce them, right? And there's all kinds of cultural matters there, forces at work, some of which I'll already talk about next week with the media, that helps explain why we sit in front of the TV or the computer watching instead of playing. How much is this worth in dollars? One block in the NBA Finals. I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm sure somebody does, or could figure it out. Like, we know that a block in the NBA is worth about 6.7 points per game, okay? So you can go from there to figure out, on average, and then start to refine it and understand, oh, that block was probably worth X amount of dollars. And I will admit that I find it kind of intriguing to go through that process. But then I think to myself, well, first of all, worth to who? How do you determine that? Obviously, as soon as you begin the calculations, and maybe some of you who are more adept at economics and math than me started to think about this. Oh, we're actually talking about dollars for the owner, right? But is that the only person that block is worth something to? It was worth something to me. I don't know how to talk about what it was worth to me or what it was worth to LeBron James as a human being. What it was worth to that dude that I showed you earlier who burned the LeBron jersey a few years ago. I also wonder, like, how do you translate all of the qualitative things that go into that block, all the years of work, right? What price do you put on those to figure out what that block was worth? Do you account for those things? Is that part of the calculation? Because in a certain sense, then you're asking, like, how much is the life of LeBron James worth? And that is the kind of thinking that thinking within the market pushes us towards thinking about human lives in terms of that, how much they are worth. Okay? We may not be able to get out of that market, okay? And I certainly enjoy a lot of things as a result of it. That's part of what the market does. It generates commodities. And if you are lucky enough and privileged enough to have access to those commodities by exchanging a certain amount of your life for them, that's awesome. So I get the question, I get into the question, but then I finally think about, like, okay, well, LeBron James, I'm not sure how real he is to me. I mean, honestly, I don't know how real he is to me. I know that he's a human being, and sometimes he feels very real, but sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes I realize, he's a commodity for me. So I'm thinking, the question, well, what's his life worth? That's a dramatic thing to ask, and I don't want anybody to put a price on anyone's life, but it doesn't really come home till I think, okay, what's LeBron's block worth? All right, that's a question. What is my next sentence worth? What are the notes you're writing right now worth? What will the paper you write for this class, if you write one, what will it be worth? And then it starts to kind of disturb me to think about everything getting funneled through this machine that turns all of our lives, all of the feelings, all the qualitative kinds of experiences we have that are the thing that makes each of us unique, and turn it all into something that allows us to be exchanged for other things, which means to strip away our uniqueness. That block is just a block. It's like any other block. Just like that dollar bill is like any other dollar bill. But you and me and your GSIs, we are not all alike. So when I think about that, I want to say, fuck that question. What is that block worth? What is my lecture worth? What is your University of Michigan degree worth? Fuck that way of thinking. Think about yourselves as human beings. Because of that. It's your life. It's passing right now. Right now. So you should think about what you're investing it in. What's important to you. All right. Thanks. Have a good week.